It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Woo! I nailed it. That's with right. My special guest star, Mr. Rob Chiarelli. Woo! They love you, Rob.
The crowd goes wild.
They do. And I got to say, Rob is such a good friend. He's actually here with me at the office on a Sunday, taking time away from his personal life. Ooh, our lip sync is off. We'll have to fix that later. Anyway,
yes, sir.
I really appreciate you coming in on a Sunday. I'm sure you had
Good to hang. We get to talk music. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, last night we were hanging out. Michael Lloyd, who many of you taxi members know from the Road Rally. Scoot this way a little. Come a little closer. Closer to me.
Get a little bit closer. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Michael Lloyd and the legendary music attorney John Branca had a Hollywood Christmas party at SIR last night.
That was fun.
Yeah, Rob and I went together, and it was a lot of fun. And the cool part was Michael Lloyd was playing a McCartney bass in a band with John Branca on drums and some other talented musicians. And it was great to see Michael Lloyd up there kicking it. It was a good time was had by all.
That was nice.
It was. So anyway, as many of you know, and Rob always hates when I say this stuff, but he's got 5 Grammys, 5 or 6, 5?
The statue's 5, but let's not get into that.
Jesus Christ. Well, and somewhere around 100 gold and platinum records. That's for people who don't know you
stop
yet.
it.
And he's mixed virtually all of those. Were you born with some special gift or talent? Did you just like pop right out of your mommy? This amazingly talented guy.
Yes, I had the ability to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. That was one of the things that I was born with, and bad sense of humor, dry sense of humor. I mean, the list goes on.
I want to know how you got to be so good that you're in demand. I mean, I'm not going to go through the list because he gets upset when I do that, but the list of A-plus level talent that Rob has worked with during his 30-year career, something like that.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that either. You get in all of this.
I know
all of the things.
Anyway, you look at the people on the list that Rob has worked with, and it's quite astonishing in a good way. But
what are we talking about today? Hold on a second.
It's all good stuff.
No.
No, I spent like 3 hours writing this stuff the other night.
No. No.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to avoid those. Anyway, look, obviously you didn't, you had to develop your skills to get to the point where you're so in demand and have the good fortune to work with these amazing artists. How did you develop those mixing skills? I would say pointing at the criteria sign behind us there, it's Studio A.
Mm-hmm.
I was very fortunate in that I worked around a lot of other great engineers and producers and could pick their brains and just keep my mouth shut and my ears open and learn from them. Was that some of how you learned? Did you read, Recording Magazine or Mix Magazine, or did you listen to records? How did you do it?
I think it's all of the above. For me, my first recording experience was to record a jazz song I wrote in high school. And
Really?
It went way over budget, and I had to swap a couple of the players out and try to get, some. I lost my first experience about hire the right people, be prepared, and I did some recording in college. I did a lot with Gary Vandy. Do you remember Gary?
Yeah, from Studio Center Studios in North Miami Beach.
One of my early mentors. Yeah, we recorded with Gary, who I love to this day, and he's I just watched everything he did.
Yeah.
And Keith Cohen was his assistant at the time. I went to college with Keith.
Rob and I both went to the University of Miami.
You were there before me, though.
Yeah.
Let's tell everybody that.
Yeah, I graduated years before Rob arrived.
But Keith Cohen went there, and he, in my opinion, is a Hall of Fame, level mixer. He did so many great records. And I think you mentioned mentors, and you have to have, I think, people that you can learn from. And those are two. You were another when I came to LA, and when we worked together in the mid-'80s. Craig Burbage is another, and there are many of them. But I think I've been really lucky that way.
And
I am a sponge.
You are, and you ask a lot of questions. I remember I did
Yeah.
a project with Rob when you were like 21 years old or something, and it was stuff that he had
That
written.
was just a few years ago.
Right, yeah, it was like, what, 4 or 5 years ago. And Rob wrote all the material and played every instrument and sang on it. And he was a little annoying. We were doing it.
Tried to sing on it.
We did part of it in the studio complex that I worked at in Midtown Manhattan in New York, a place called Howard Schwartz Recording, and we had a
Yeah.
nice music room there. And then sometimes, like 2 or 3 times a month, I would fly up to Boston. We'd work at Synchro Sound, which was the studio owned by the band The Cars.
Yep.
With an MCI 600 console in it that I absolutely hated. It's the one MCI console that sounded just really bad, in my opinion. And the room didn't sound great, but you were constantly leaning over my shoulder going, every single time I touched a fader or turned an
What the hell
equalizer.
is that? What are you doing now?
Yeah.
Now what are you doing? I
Right.
don't know if I wanted to learn or I wanted to give you a hard time. It was maybe a little of each.
Well, at the time, I remember thinking he doesn't trust me. But then as I
No.
got to know you better, it was that you just wanted to absorb it all. You were learning.
Yeah, I wanted to know what everything, did and what changed the sound. And, I approached playing music too, the same way with my instrument. I just wanted to learn it and practice and know everything about it.
What is your number one instrument?
Bass, no question about it.
And if I remember, and I've never actually seen a copy of it, but I've seen it on Amazon, you wrote a book about bass.
I did. It was published by Hal Leonard, Cherry Lane.
So you make like a couple $100,000 a year from that book, right?
2-3 million royalty checks just come rolling in every month. I can't wait.
Oh, man. Do you ever go back and listen to the stuff that you did early? And I'm talking like once you became professional, which if memory serves was probably around 1988 or 89 or 90.
Yeah, as a mixer, 89. Yeah, that's when I had my first sort of hits, name on a hit. So, yeah. Do I go back? I'll tell you what, I do go back, and it's a funny thing, I think people can relate to this. It's back then we worked in a different way, and there's some records that I did that I'm stunned at how I missed certain things.
Yeah.
But there are others that I think, wow, that really does sound pretty good. And I wonder how I did it, and could I do it again today?
Really?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like, you have the analog console, you have that gear, it forces you to make certain decisions in a certain way, and you have a time limitation, and you don't have countless revisions like we do today. And I think there's a benefit to committing, and I've always believed that, and I still do, is commit to it when you feel like you have it, because having too much time can be an enemy in certain respects.
I've never had to deal with that because I haven't worked in a studio in a very, very long time. But I've never used Pro Tools in a pro studio. SSL analog tape machines, whether they were Studer or 2 inches. Sometimes I worked on a Sony 24-track half-inch digital, which you could actually edit the tape, digital tape with a razor blade, and it worked pretty well. But
I used to love the 3348s.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I love that. Loved the sound of them, loved everything about them. Oh, my God.
I had a 3324 in the last room that I worked in New York, and I liked it. I didn't love it. And for what it costs, and it's big, the thing was like the size of a stove.
It's like a tank. But it had a drum trigger. You could use a trigger.
Right.
Trigger backgrounds and drums and all kinds of stuff.
And the fact that you could edit tape, and it was really flimsy
I
tape.
didn't know that. I never did that. And I used that thing for 10 years.
You're kidding.
I never had. I don't think you could take a razor blade of that to the 3348 HD. I don't think so.
You could on the 3324. You could literally lay it in a block and cut the tape.
Jeez, okay.
Yeah, and it had some sort of memory that even if, because you're cutting zeros and ones, you're not cutting any analog sound, but it had an analog track buried it had 24 tracks and a skinny little stripe of analog, so you could rock it and hear whoop 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 and then cut it like
never did it.
Yeah, wow. They didn't talk about it a lot because I think a lot of people tried to compare it to cutting analog tape, it was a little different. You had to be more careful and more precise, but it
I
did
could
work.
do the 2-inch analog, window edits, you name it. I made a good living doing that. That was good stuff. But that's lost art.
Yeah,
punching is a lost art.
I miss all that stuff.
Yeah.
If I were to go back to work in a studio, I'd have to really learn everything anew again, but I would still have the physics and the sonic principles, the
instincts, all that.
The ears,
still there.
The ears are the hard part to develop because you can't learn that in a week or a month or 6 months. It's just constant learning.
Mm-hmm.
So did you ever have any milestone moments where you experienced some fairly significant bumps, like you went from being good enough to get it on tape and like, yeah, not a bad mix, and then all of a sudden you look back and go, wow, I'm way better now than I was 6 months ago? Did you have those incremental increases in your skill set?
Absolutely. One comes immediately to mind. The big single, well, I don't want to say it's the biggest one, but in the mid-90s, around 95, I worked with Richard Perry on a Ray Charles album. And I love Richard. And he was at the time, probably still is, the second most successful producer in the history of recorded music. Second only to, I believe, Phil Spector.
Wow.
I mean, he had like 100 top 10 hits.
I didn't know that. I knew Richard Perry was a big deal. I had no idea that he was
Nielsen,
in the
Mick Jagger, all of the individual Beatles, and you name it, Dylan. He's all of these guys. I couldn't possibly name them all. So we were doing the record, and he pushed me to explore every possibility known to man.
And in what regard, as far as sonic ideas or trying?
Well, I'll give you a great example,
Yeah.
and I've told this at the Taxi Rally, and to many people. Now, Richard, there was a piano solo, and he had hired 3 piano players to do it, and there were 3 different names, 3 different sets of mics, 3 different studios, and 3 different pianos.
Okay.
And it was maybe a 16-bar solo, let's say, and he said, I want you to cut the first half from player number 1.
Yeah.
And then the second half from player number 2, and blend them together, and that's going to be the solo.
Okay.
And then so I did that. He came in and listened. He said, "That sounds pretty good. Now take player number 3 and put him in the middle." So now I had the 3 different things to sort of listen to and really dial him in. And
so you had to literally match EQ
better.
and reverb and stuff. Okay.
Match everything. Try to match it. And then he said, now at the end, I want the left hand from player number 1 and the right hand from player number 3 or something.
No way.
Swear. And I thought he was nuts. I thought, man, this is impossible. You are asking me to do the impossible.
I would say.
And there was a few other things in there. And don't you know, after some hours of work, I sat back and listened to that, and I thought it was genius. It sounded so good. Now, you and I, if we were listening for it, you could hear it.
Okay.
But if you didn't know to listen for it, melodically, beautiful. The construction of the solo, beautiful. The way it developed, beautiful. I mean, he made all the right musical choices. That's what I'm saying. And the technical part was he just wanted it to be as good as it could be. And that was a time, and you can do it much easier with Pro Tools, but we're talking about 2-inch analog tape, nothing more. So bouncing stuff and trying to match it. And I thought that the pursuit of excellence and the degree at which he was looking for the right, the right feel and the right feeling, I thought, wow, I did something that I didn't think was possible, only because he pushed me to do it. Now, isn't that amazing? See, I would never. You would think that's crazy.
I'm astonished that he even asked you to do that. I'm equally as astonished.
And that's why he's a genius. The guy's a genius.
And using the left hand from one and the right.
Oh yeah, the left hand did a nice little melodic line or something, and voice leading or something, and the top line played the melody, and there were 2 different things. And if you listen closely, you'd say, I hear the edits. But if you're not, if you're listening with a person's ear that wants to just enjoy the music, it's beautiful.
Wow. And
I'm
you
not
had
saying
to-
it was easy,
And
because it
there's
wasn't.
3 different pianos, 3
Yeah.
different players, 3 different studios, probably 3 different engineers on each of those. So each of them would treat the piano sound differently. So,
Well, they were different, yeah.
wow.
And I thought he was crazy, and then at the end I thought, that's why he's him. Isn't that crazy?
It is
I
crazy.
never told you that?
No.
Yeah,
All
that
the
was
years
one
we've
of the
known each other,
moments.
you've never mentioned that.
Yeah, that was one of the moments.
Any other great stories like that? I love this stuff.
There was, Jay King did the same thing. He pushed me very hard early on, and he thought he could break me. But my dad was a tough guy, and Jay was big bark. Big bark, no bite, not for me, and all coming from love. And a lot of people, a lot of all my assistants became very, very successful. And the other, this past week, I had lunch with Adam and Mike from Paramount. They early guys that gave me a break.
That was right, your first studio that you worked at in LA, right? Like your first
Yes.
entree into the
Yeah.
world of pro recording.
Yeah. And they say, why are your assistants, why do they do so? Well, I'm hard on them, because people were hard on me. Now, maybe it's, maybe that's the wrong way to go about it sometimes, but what I loved about that quote up there on your door is that, it's better to have some criticism and have somebody be hard on you, rather than tell you and validate what you're doing when it's false.
Right.
You want to learn. It's my job to teach my assistants. And I expect them in 6 months to show me some new stuff. Otherwise, what are we doing here, right? So, Jay was tough on me, but I appreciate how hard he was, because there were people that, I had to have that experience.
It's carried over. If I can get a little personal here, you're hard on your kids, not in a mean way.
No.
But I've known your kids since both of them were born, and you demand excellence from them, but not in a derogatory or mean way.
No.
And I've never seen your kids react badly when you say something to them. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, your kids were in a band for a long time, and you pushed them really hard. I mean, there were times I walked out of the room and I thought Joe Jackson wasn't as hard on his kids.
Well, see, the thing is when I went into the rehearsals, I'm not their dad.
Right.
And if I'm going to spend my time and I'm going to do it, what I expect is you to focus on it and do the best you can. It's not a high thing to ask. It's not, not everybody can do it, because when you go into the rehearsals in a professional setting, whether it's, an engineer, a producer, a singer, a musician, anybody, you go into that session, be a professional and learn how to be a professional. Handle yourself professionally. Show up on time, try to be, good to people and do the very best you can. And don't screw around. So when my kids would screw around, there's a lesson there. There's a moment, because it's not that they're going to become necessarily, they're not going to be the next Beatles. We all know that. But there's a lot to learn from that experience. If you're in an orchestra, you're part of a large ensemble. You need to do your job and show up and do it the best you can, or else the other, 39 people are going to waste their time. It's going to, it doesn't, it's not the way I was taught. I don't know any other way to say it. And I think you have to dedicate and try your best. There's times to have fun. And I think my sessions, frankly, forever have been the most fun sessions when I produce. I think it's a fun time. But we do get the work done. And there's times when I see the clock and we may need to, get going. And I say, guys, we're going to have to, get a little kick in the butt here and let's get this done, But generally speaking, it's fun because everybody understands it's professional, it's work, whether it's my kids or anyone else.
It certainly paid off with your kids. I'm sure I've told you this 100 times, but he happens to have 2 spectacularly good kids that are respectful.
Well, that's very kind.
Well, they take life serious. They are number one professional. They are courteous. They are appreciative. They're like all the right things. So I'm sure that in their moments of like walking out of the room going, boy, Dad was a jerk to me.
If I could only get them to empty the trash once a week,
But I get the sense that they get it, they appreciate it, and I love the fact that your son Robert still calls me Mr. Laskow.
He always will.
I know. How old is Robert now? Like
He's 27.
27 years old. He's still, I see him frequently throughout the year, and he says, hi, Mr. Laskow. I said, Robert, you've known me since you were literally in diapers. But it's cute, and it says something. So good on you for raising them that way, and I'm sure you're proud of them. They're really good kids.
Well, they don't always listen to me, by the way. I mean, I love them to death, but that's the thing. I mean, raising kids is hard. And someone once told me, well, long before I had kids, I was in the studio. I can't remember who it was, but I thought it was awesome. One of the producers, I was mixing a record, and he said, and he was talking to my assistant, or someone else, might not be my assistant, but someone asked him about, you're making your kid take piano lessons. He used the word like making or something.
Yeah. And
the producer turned around and he said, if making my kid learn a musical instrument means I'm a bad dad, so be it.
Wow.
And I thought, you know what? That's really interesting. He wants them to learn a musical instrument because you learn a lot from that. Learning how to play, there's a discipline there. Learning how to play baseball. Same thing. Apply yourself. Don't be productive. Don't waste a lot of time. And we talked about this yesterday. Time is so valuable.
And the older we get, the more precious it becomes. Whoever said that, once you get over the midpoint of your life, you really do. Yeah. I find myself thinking about, wow, I could have one day left on the planet, or I could have 15 or 20 years left. I don't know, but you are more cognizant of it, and things that steal your time.
It's precious.
Yeah,
it really
and they
is.
become more obvious, and you become a little resentful when things steal your time. So that's why I'm really happy you said yes to coming in on a Sunday.
And it doesn't. But these are fun, and it doesn't mean. And I love doing these, and I love giving back, and hanging out with you is always a ball. But when let me just add one little thing. Just because you dedicate and you spend an hour on a musical instrument or in a rehearsal, it doesn't mean you don't have fun in life. There's a balance. That's a tricky part. I mean, my kids have a ton of fun. It's not all work and no play. It's the same with me. Maybe I'm out of balance because I do work a lot, and you're out of balance because you work so much, right? I mean, we know that. It's a demanding business. But you still have fun. You still find time to do the things with family and friends and do things you enjoy. It's not, I don't want to overstate it, in other words. And I don't want people to think that I'm like some nut. But yeah, I expect my assistants to be professional and in that environment. And
yeah,
I do. I just do.
You and I are very, very similar in that regard, specifically about assistants. All of my assistants, with the exception of one, and I really shouldn't have hired this young man because he just didn't have that thing, that spark of dedication that makes you work harder.
The burning desire.
He didn't have that, and he washed out after about a year and a half. But my other assistants went on to bigger and better things, and I was always very proud of them. Let's go back to Jay King for a minute. Let's talk at some length about him, because he joined you for a panel at the Road Rally in 2023.
He did. And he's since received like the presidential honor. Did you know that?
No.
I didn't tell you that?
I don't think you did. No.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
From President Biden?
Yeah, in Harris. That was back in last year. I had to go up and give a little speech out there in Sacramento.
Wow. Really?
I got to tell you about that.
No.
It was amazing. Yeah. Anyway, go on.
Well, let's talk about Jay, because he, I'd met him through you a couple of times. So it was hi, nice to meet you kind of stuff. It wasn't until that day on stage at the Road Rally. But he's not intense in a prickly way. He's intense in a wow, that dude is profound. It's so obvious in like a minute or two that there's a lot to be learned. So what was it like? Go into a little more depth on Jay King, because maybe those lessons apply to these guys.
Well, so Jay had the reason I got my big break, it was July 4th weekend in 1989, and Jay had fired everybody else in the studio that was qualified to engineer for him. You look surprised. Didn't I tell you this?
I knew that you were like the last man standing, and that's how you got your break.
Yeah, and I had a ticket to go home. I was ready to wash out and go home and give up, right? But July 4th weekend, I didn't want to go back because I couldn't face my friends. It was shame. I kept me in L.A. At least for a little while, at least for that weekend. And it's funny how things work, how the Lord works, as they say. And so Jay had fired everyone. I was the last one. So they gave me the session with Jay.
Why did he fire everybody?
They couldn't handle it. He was just fast-paced and, again, professional. He wanted to work quick, and when he had an idea, he wanted to get it down. And if you couldn't do it, you had to be able to hang with that. And when it's intense, because I think he just won a Grammy for Lean on Me the year before, so he was at the top of his game. Pagers are going off all day. People are coming in to see him. He's in demand. It's one of those things where, he had a lot on his plate, and he was at the top of the game. And he...
So, on typical day, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that he was the kind of guy where tape machines had to be aligned, all the stuff was ready to go when he walked into the room, not like, oh, let me see if I can find that for you, or let's find the notes for that, or, oh man, we forgot to put the time code, on the start of the song, or all those little things that go into a smooth session that aren't audio related.
And there's a lot that goes into setting the mood and for big artists. I mean, you want to make sure things go smoothly. And I've failed a couple times, not many, but a couple times I could have done a better job. But with Jay, I did the best I could, and I'd say he was not easy to please, and he's a demanding guy, and I'm grateful for it. He used to come in when I first did the first mixes for him. He'd come over to the console, he'd stroll in, he'd hit the solo button. In fact, I said this at the speech I gave with him. He'd walk in and say, "That's the ugliest sound in the history of recorded sound. Fix it." And he'd scream and he'd walk out the door. And I'm like, geez, I thought it sounded pretty good. I'm saying to myself, this bass sounds pretty good to me, but I'm like, okay, he's not happy with it. Let me figure out what I did or what I can do to improve it. And he just pushed me. And I could tell so many beautiful stories about Jay because he is probably the most generous person, that I've ever worked with in a lot of ways, I wish I had a whole hour to talk about him. And you would be floored.
Give me a couple more. We've got some time. And I just remember I was mesmerized every time he opened his mouth on stage. So if you can think of a couple, I know it's putting you on the spot.
I'll give you one. Okay, so Jay, there's a backstory. One time we'll talk about it because it's equally as good. But when I mixed that first record for him, he Warner Brothers wasn't so sure because I was the new guy.
Okay.
So I mixed the whole album, and then they hired Barney Perkins, God rest his soul, another guy I'd call a mentor in a certain respect. So they hired him to mix because he was one of the main guys. And Jay, he knew I was kind of bummed because I didn't think I maybe would get any mixes on the record after mixing it and done. I said, you know what? He paid me to go sit with Barney, and Barney let me sit in the control room while he mixed the album that I had just mixed.
Ooh.
I was a fly on the wall, and Craig Burbage, who, God rest his soul, another mentor of mine, he knew I was in the dumps a little bit. You could probably tell by my body language that I was disappointed, He said, you know what, you'll probably end up with half the record, and he'll end up with half the record, because you do something that's, good for, the up-tempo stuff, and he's going to get the ballads or something. I said, okay. Made me feel a little better, and he said, you need to go there and learn how to be professional. So there's that word again. He said, just watch Barney, and just see how he handles the room. And I sat and I watched him.
So it's interesting that he said, see how he handles the room versus see how he gets a bass sound or what his favorite frequency is to cut on an acoustic guitar or whatever. It's handle the room. That was the target.
Yeah, something like that. But it wasn't about, because I think everybody, if you want... you wouldn't hire Steve Gadd to do something like that you would want, a Dave Grohl sound on or something, right? You wouldn't hire me to do what, Chris Lord-Alge does. We have different sensibilities. And what they do is you can't replicate it. And in those days, and probably still today, but at that point in my career, people would want someone's sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really wanted to do that. I just wanted to do what my instincts dictated. Yeah. And I think that what I learned is that Barney's instincts, they were musical instincts, his sensibilities. The song guided him a certain way in the production. And that's what I kind of took from it. It wasn't like, oh yeah, you added 1 dB at 2K or something. I never even looked at any of that. But his workflow and how he was able to construct the mixes and how he, handled maybe the A&R people and other stuff. How
which
he
is an
interacted.
art form
It
unto
can be
itself.
hard. Yeah. So all that stuff, I was pretty new at it, and I couldn't pay. Jay paid me to be there. I was like, I can't believe these guys paying me to learn, and I can never repay that. And the whole idea is that I couldn't. It's priceless. Priceless.
I'm glad that you brought up people having a different sound and kind of having some guys are rock guys, some guys are R&B guys, so on and so forth. But you've covered a wider swath of genres and styles that you've mixed over the years than a lot of other engineers who are in that upper echelon. They have a thing. That's what they do. You go to that guy for that sound. Mm-hmm. What do you do to, Kirk Franklin. Rob has done a lot of records with Kirk Franklin, who, and I know you don't like to talk about folks that you've worked with a lot. They're pretty private people, so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth. But Kirk Franklin is the biggest modern gospel artist on the planet. He is a legitimate superstar, not just in the fact that he can fill the Staples Center for 3 nights in a row, but I got to see him. Rob and I went to the Grammys together last year, I think, and Kirk Franklin on stage is mind-blowing.
He is.
And then I watched that video you sent me the link to about him finding out who his real dad was. And they showed him.
He's a special guy.
Behind the scenes in the studio, and you could see what a special guy he was. That story was mostly about his journey and dealing with finding out who his real dad is. But watching those little moments in his studio, he's a whole different can of worms than other artists. Who's Mark Ballas? Out of all the things that you've done that I've listened to, I go back and listen to that Mark Ballas record.
Oh, he's great.
He's one of the guys from Dancing with the Stars, who's also a recording artist. Mm-hmm. And that record was
really talented guy.
Very different from other stuff you worked on. So back to the root question is, what do you do to make yourself adapt to a new genre or a new type of artist that you've not worked with before, that's not in your normal retinue?
Well, I don't know if I do anything. I just try to serve the song and the production. I try to learn what the artists are about before I go in. If it's an established artist, I kind of have to see where they've been.
So you go back and listen to previous records?
Absolutely. And I listen to what they've done and get a sense of where I think it might be going. And, there are certain things that are consistent in, I never worked with Taylor Swift, but you can see that journey. She's a force of nature, right? What she's done over the 15 years now. I don't know. Is it that long?
Probably.
Maybe even longer.
She started when she was a kid, yeah.
Yeah, and I've never worked with her, but you can see this is a good example. There's been this progression, and in Ed Sheeran, there's been development, and the Beatles, through their career, things have evolved. I think that if it's an established artist, I'd always listen and really make sure I got a handle on whatever I could in terms of artistic sensibilities.
So do you have a conversation with them before you start the record? Are you trying to accomplish anything different? Are you moving 20% to the left or right?
No, not so much. I just try to... That would be weird. I did have a couple of those conversations over the years, but only a couple. One was Maverick City, because they were known as, they were, and still are, top gospel artists, and Kirk did a record with them. So Now we have the merging of what Kirk's thing is and their thing. And I was like, okay, so we're going to try to do something different, or what are y'all thinking? Because before I start, this is the beginning of the mixes. So if there's anything, let me know what you have in mind.
Yeah.
We always, well, not always, but certain cases we talk about it. And I'll always ask, is there anything you're thinking? How close are the demo mixes? Are you happy with them? Do you feel like you're 90% there? Most people would say, do whatever you think at this point. But in years past, it took a while to get there. And I'd say that, actually I do ask those, but not in the way you sort of framed it. I will ask, is there anything, what do you think of the demos? Are they close to you? Some people would say, they're as close as I could get them. We're looking for another 5%.
Okay.
Got it. That means do not go too far, because the A&R likes it, the management likes it, the production likes it, the artist likes it. Hey, man, don't throw a wrench in. And other times they say, we feel like it's kind of close, but, we're really open. We want to take it a little ways further. And then there's producers like my buddy Emil, who's a brilliant producer, Charlie Wilson.
Okay.
And every time he gives me a record, he says, I don't care. Do what you think is going to make it a hit. He always says the same thing. I know it's but I still ask him, because if he's been a guy, and I love his philosophy. If he doesn't have the single, he'll say, Rob, I want to get the single. Make this into a single. Do whatever you think. If I don't like it, I'll tell you. And I'm like, fine. That means I can do whatever I want.
Does that ever include editing or
Sure,
taking
absolutely.
instrumentation out, or can you go back to them and suggest production stuff that's beyond the scope
Some
of mixing?
Some people. With Emil, I can. Sometimes I've muted stuff in the verses and the choruses, and I've chopped choruses and put it up front. Sometimes he says yes, sometimes he says no. Sometimes he said that's what I'm looking for, and sometimes he says that's horrible. But it's okay, because I've worked with him for 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's going to fire me. It's a relationship where I'm throwing ideas out, and let's see if we can get some spark. Maybe we can bring this up in a way that, hey, I got an idea. Not all of them are great. Not all of my ideas are great. I might think they are, but they're not. And sometimes
it's
that's
great
part
that
of
they
it.
give you permission to
Not
throw
everyone.
Big changes out there.
There are others who I'll try it though, and they'll say no. We don't really think that that's the direction we want to go. And there have been times where I'm like, oh my God, please listen to me, please, because this is. It's a direction that the music is going, and we're a little behind the times, sonically or something. And
Yep.
And that's one of those things when you're mixing 200-300 records a year, 200 at least for me. You have a sense of what's coming out next, not what's on the radio today. And there are trends, and there are little
Very
things.
important, yeah.
And no, let's filter this stuff, because this is what's the cool stuff's going to be. And if you don't really do it, it's going to sound dated in a few months when it comes out. But sometimes it's people don't want it, and it's okay. It's part of the process. It's all right.
You did a panel with me at the Road Rally this year with Ron Harris and Robina Ritchie Barker called Letting Go of Precious, which was inspired by a comment that Robina made when I was interviewing her for a Taxi TV or something. And you just mentioned it without using the P word in what
The
you're
precious
talking.
word?
Yeah, when somebody you're working with is doing something that makes them sound dated, they are not moving their sound forward. They're digging further into the rut that they're stuck in. And
Great point.
And you have to be the one in the room. You're almost a sacrificial lamb, because you could put the relationship in jeopardy, or you could get kicked off that record for insulting them or whatever. Obviously, the more years and better relationship you have with somebody, the more permission you get to do that. But how hard do you have to fight when somebody
It's never a fight.
How does it get resolved when they're being overly precious about something? This is the way I've always done it, Rob. And in your heart of hearts, and you're working for them for their best outcome. How do you go about holding a hard line saying, you just have to trust me on this because you're
You
not
can't.
seeing. Really?
I can't say you have to trust me. Why? Because there's so much more. This promotion, if it doesn't get promoted right, I could have been right, but I'll get the blame because I said trust me. It's not about that. It's just about making some suggestions. And when we were on that final panel, someone had a nice song that I liked, and they played the guitar voicings like you would normally play standard guitar voicings. So I almost picked up Michael Lloyd's guitar and said, well, hold on a minute. That was the perfect, I would have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I may do a panel on this next year where you can play certain voicings, but they don't sound contemporary, they don't sound modern, right?
Yeah.
So you could play an open, E, B, C sharp, A, right?
Yeah.
C sharp minor, A. And you've heard that since the beginning of time. But if you only play tenths and leave everything out, that sounds like what was happening 4 years ago. But if you let the E and the B string ring, if you're a guitar player, and then you just move down, then that's a little more contemporary. Okay. If you just move the bass note, that's even more modern. All of these little things it's the same changes, but the way the harmony moves.
Yeah.
In the common notes makes a big difference. So
I'm so glad you're talking about this.
So this stuff will modernize a simple song, because there's really only 4 or 5 chords that people are using now. I mean, it's not like we're using augmented chords and diminished chords and flat 9 chords in minor 6s everywhere. It's not happening like that. Not in pop music. It is in some jazz circles, of course, but I think that those little changes, those are beyond what I would do as a mixer. But if I hear a song that I love, oftentimes that melody's beautiful, but the chords underneath have to be, structured a little differently for what we have in contemporary music today. And the bass line and how that leads is a big deal.
Key change.
Okay.
I can't remember. I can't remember. Somebody I was talking to 10 years ago was telling a story about how a song just wasn't coming together. The label wasn't excited. The A&R people weren't excited. The artist wasn't excited. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember if it was the songwriter or the producer said, let's try it down a third. Whatever. It just...
Change the key.
Yeah, and it worked so much better on every level, not just for the vocalist to sound richer in that key, but everything about it changed and everybody fell in love with it. I don't know that I would have ever thought of that back in my day, but I'm glad to hear you talk about that stuff now, voicing, key change, whatever, and make it sound more modern, because a lot of Taxi members are middle-aged, and they're at a point in their life where they've got the time and the money, and they're falling back in love with making music, and so they join Taxi. But they are somewhat stuck in the decade of music where they fell in love with it, and their stuff.
Always reach back to those sensibilities.
Yeah,
we all do.
Yeah.
I listen every Friday. My assistant sends me all the hits from all the charts.
That's exactly where I was going with this.
Yeah. So I listen to them, and and I love modern music. I mean, if I hear one more person say, "Well, wasn't it great in 1984 with Van Halen?" Yeah, it sure was. But I mean, listen, man, that's 42 years ago, 40 years ago. I mean, come on, things change, and I love music as it is today just as much as I like Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not quite as much, but a Revolver or something. But I love music, and I love the changes, and I think the kids are coming up with fresh ideas, and I love it. But you have to embrace it, I think, if you want to be relevant. You can't expect the world to conform to what we think is cool in 1992.
So give some tips from today forward, because your point was really well taken about whatever is happening now will be a year old by the time this record comes out. And it may not be like grotesquely dated, but it's going to be somewhat dated. It's not moving the ball down the field. So are there any things that you've noticed recently on your Friday afternoon listening sessions where you go, that is a cool trend? I'm hearing that more and more and more. Our members would love to hear that if you've got some.
Yeah. I think over the well, wow, that's a tough one to answer because there's a lot. If I could, yeah, if I would speak in generally about it, I would say fresh ideas. Look for some new approach to whatever it is that you're doing. So let's say your guitar, let's see the key, you mentioned the key. Is that really right? I mean, sometimes people in their demos, they're in the total wrong key and they can't hit the high notes, or it's just too low and there's not enough energy in it.
And they don't recognize that they're in the wrong key on their own. They need somebody from the outside.
Well, that's what I'd be out of work if as a producer, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And Ron Harris, you should have him talk about Christina and when they were working together and how Christina just came in and I'll let him tell the story, but she kept turning that key up. She knew just what she wanted to do, and he was like, what? And then bam, she hits it and out of the park. It's a very good story. I'll leave the details out so you can ask him about it. But the key is a big deal. And if, let's say, the song's in the key of F, well, you know what? Try tuning the guitar up a half step and use open voicings and some stuff. And let some, strings ring if you're a guitar player. Retune the guitar. Keith Richards used all kinds of weird tunings in the Stones. You can't play it. Most Stones songs, you cannot play with a normal tuning. Try to play them. They just don't sound quite right. But when you retune in the way he did it, it has a thing about it that you can't replicate. And most people think when they play Honky Tonk Woman that they got it, but not if you listen closely. I mean, he does some very interesting things, and he always has little guitars doing counterpoint in the background, and that's carried through modern times. Like, that is something that is timeless. I mean, we're talking about mid-60s. So 60 years ago?
Yeah.
Those ideas, melody, fresh ideas, good approach, make sure that the keys are right. I mean, those are the fundamentals. Now let's take it a step further. Do you want to filter stuff? The Bieber stuff that Skrillex did, that stuff was awesome, The filters and all of that approach and those sounds that they used. And that was, to me, when that came out, I thought, wow, that's smoke. And Madonna did it with William Orbit when she did that record.
So how do you know, because it's so easy to go into replicating what they've done. And, if their record's out on the radio now, it was probably recorded a year and a half before. And so if you're copying their sounds, then you are imitating something that will be dated by the time your record comes out. So really what you're asking people to do is not copy the sound, but open their mind.
Yeah, innovate yourself. Try to do something a little different.
And how do you know the difference between a really good innovative thing and a really bad one? And I'm asking this on behalf of our members because most of them work at home in a studio by themselves. They don't have Jay King in the room or anybody to really bounce stuff off of, although many of them are networked with other members. But not having that immediacy of somebody sitting next to you at the console or sitting on the couch in the back of the room, we turn around and go, does that sound as good to you guys as it does to me? And they're all going, dude, that's genius. You've landed a big fish right there.
Well, there's always nerves that go around with new ideas. It's not like, well, is this idea too much? Is it weird? Like, listen to Crimson and Clover from Tommy James and the Shondells. I mention this all the time. And I make all my assistants listen to the song. I'm like, this is one of the most innovative songs. I think they used a Hofner bass. They have tremolo on the vocals. They're panned hard. It's got all of this interesting sounds. Like, you tell me how they pulled this off. I don't know. And when you listen to these records, I mean, be bold about it sometimes, When I first was mixing, people used to say, I got two comments all the time. One is the mixes are too clean.
Okay.
They wanted everything to be old school. Okay. That's what the word was in 1989. And I said, you know what? I think the future is going to be clean and new school. So I'm going to stick with it because I believe in it and I'm willing to lay my career on the line. Because
and they didn't go out to the producer's lounge and pick up a phone and say, okay.
Well, some people didn't hire me back, but that's the way it goes. I mean, you have to have conviction and you have to have balls when it comes to it. And I just said, when it comes around, when music changes, when the winds blow a different direction, remember that I'm the new school guy.
Right.
And then it did change. And
Is that what you put in your Christmas card? Remember who taught you this first?
No, it was, I'm the new school guy. What do you got to do? You got to break in somehow. You have to do something different. If you're just copying everybody, what good is that?
Well, I found myself, and I've had this conversation with you and other people in our corner of the world, that you go through an imitative stage. As
Absolutely.
an engineer, first thing, you're just freaking happy to get the needle to move on the tape machine, so
That's
that
right.
you got signal from the microphone out in the room through the console to the tape machine. Phase 1. Phase 2 is I understand how to make things sound different through EQ, reverb, and compression. Phase 3 is I now am able to copy other people's sounds. It's an imitative stage, and it's an important one to go through, and you get stuck there for a while because, I got the same sound as Fleetwood Mac out on Rumors. I'm good.
Good luck with that, too.
I was
That's
able to
so
do
easy.
that. But I got stuck for a good 1.5 to 2 years where everything I did sounded like somebody else's something. But then one day, one of my assistants said to me something to the effect of, you've mastered the ability to copy anybody's anything so quickly. What's your sound? And I didn't know if I should have been insulted in the moment, but I took it like a man and thought about it and started getting to the point where I could control my own sonic destiny.
And that's where you become valuable, is when they hire, because anybody can match, anyone can get decent levels, I think. Anyone can master the technical stuff, but it's the thing that you can't be taught that is valuable, and that's your instincts and your approach and your sensibilities to the music. To me, that's the biggest deal. It's not, and you asked about different genres. Well, I have a certain sensibility with music. I tend to do things the way, I hear them in my head and I imagine what it should sound like. Manny does the same, Jason does the same, Chris does the same. Dave Boy does the same. They have their thing that is, you cannot replicate it, and what they do, is beautiful and it's genius. I mean, these are the best people, and it's not because they know how to, use Pro Tools automation.
Yeah.
It's because they have these instincts that are special.
A sonic vision.
And and they know how to serve the song, and everybody's a little bit different, and I think that's what's great about it. And the same thing with artists. Artists don't, come out of the womb thinking, I've got all of this innovative ideas in my head. They sing along with the Beatles, or, and they hear James Brown and they try to pull that off. Good luck. You might hear Prince or Michael Jackson, somebody, and good luck with that. But you go for it, and then next thing you know, wait a minute, you got Bruno Mars, you got all these guys who have like little bits of everybody because they've somehow turned it and made their own thing out of it,
Yeah.
And it becomes unique, and it becomes special, and they integrate new modern ideas into their sound.
You know what you just described? You didn't even realize it. You described the difference between AI and Rob Chiarelli. And I know you don't want to talk ad nauseum about AI, but that's AI takes a little James Brown, a little Bruno, takes a little bit of everybody, not necessarily legally, and then it spits out a thing that and depending on how you write your prompt and everything, but people talk about, but a robot doesn't have any soul, and what you just described is that musical soul, that
I'll take it.
That instinct. So that's a really valid point, and I hope that allays some fears of people, because AI is getting better by the day, but AI doesn't sit down and do a purposeful listening session. It's harvesting stuff all the time out there by scraping, but what you do on Friday is you're looking for, this is the present. How do we make that how do we move that ball down the field and make it sound like the future?
Yeah, and I think, so for me, is I've always found a lot of joy in working with other people and other musicians, bouncing ideas around, messing up, sucking for a while, as Dave Grohl would say. In his one of his movie things, he said, you work at it and you suck for a long time. And you find out, you know what, you find your way, and then you get better, and you keep working on it, and you still suck, and you get better, and you're not so bad after all, then you put it together. It's a journey, To me, I love that. I don't want to go and put some prompts in a computer and stuff, and I'm curious to see what the future holds with all of that. But I mean, I love working with people. I love working on good music and good melodies, and I love trying to, solve problems and make things better, and participate on that level. We'll see what AI does. I mean, we'll see.
Interesting thought to consider, though, is back in the early part of your career, you were working, large format consoles in famous studios. Is it a fair statement to say 75% or more of the work you do now is done in your home studio?
Yeah, even the bigger projects, I'll get them really close at home. Then let's take Kirk, for example. I'll go to his studio in Texas oftentimes and sit in the room together. And that's the part that I love.
So that's my question, because the people watching us in this video right now largely are home studio based. And they don't have anybody in the room, and they can only get feedback from their peers, which a lot of our members do, vis-a-vis the Taxi Forum, emailing stuff to people friendships that they built vis-a-vis the Road Rally or even the chat room on Taxi TV. So eventually they can, but they're not in the room. 99% of the time, I would bet that they're emailing somebody, a track. Would you listen to this? Tell me if this mix is good or what you don't like about blah, blah, blah. You have that luxury, privilege, whatever you want to call it, to go to Kirk's studio in Texas and be in the room with him and say, I feel like it's 90% there. What are you hearing? And
I don't have to say that. He'll tell me right off the bat.
You know what I'm saying? You get the immediate feedback.
I'm joking, but
from a human being.
I think that's critical, man. I got to tell you. I got to tell you, that's critical for me. In Nate and Kaylee, I used to send
the Highfields for those of you who Google them if you don't know.
Some of the most successful writers out there, really. And we bounce things off each other, and there's nothing better than to collaborate. I just find a lot of joy in it. Now, and you have to find people that you want to work with they're not going to tell you you're great. They're going to say, you know what, that course doesn't really work. Let's try something different.
Let's do a panel at next year's Road Rally where we take a song or two or three.
All right.
And we'd sit up on the stage and play it, and maybe you give feedback, Ronnie gives some feedback, and then we go to the audience. Let's have that moment where people are blurting out ideas just to see where it goes. Is sort of a.
I think that's a great idea. I think one of the things. I don't think that's going to be an easy one, because I think when people are on the spot and there are people in the audience, they're always careful. They don't want to offend. And that's tricky. And in any professional environment, you don't want to offend. You want to be constructive, but you want to get to a point where, there was, early in my career, if I didn't like a lyric, I didn't quite know how to say it. Okay? So I asked Oliver Lieber one day, well, what do you do? And he said, well, maybe you say, well, it's a little technical. Can we try something more poetic? And I've used that 1,000 times since. Can we try something a little more poetic? Or if a take isn't quite right, but you just don't quite know, can we just try another one? I'm going to keep that because I think it's good, but I think you got one more better in you. That's easy to say now, but learning those how to approach those things are key. So it's not getting any feedback is not always the right feedback. When I did about 10 years ago, Ron and I did a panel in the theater for you at Taxi, and I was trying to show that it's important to get the idea out of your head and get it out quickly without wasting a ton of time on unimportant things. So the first comment someone made was, well, I think the kick could use a little more point, a little bit. And I'm like, the kick? I mean, right? So I'm like, the kick? I didn't expect that. I'm like, and I said, well, here. So my my idea is to let's get past the kick and the snare, because I don't want to spend an hour on that when we're trying to get this song to like take shape.
Yeah.
It's got to take shape. Stopping, working an hour on the kick, and that's another point. Like if you're working 3 hours on the kick sound, something is wrong.
Yeah. Dangerous rabbit hole.
It is. And that's my way of working. Other people might say, "Man, you got to spend 3 hours on the kick." I mean, I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
I was probably guilty of that when I was coming out of my imitative stage, going into my own sound. I would spend too long on a single instrument.
Maybe that's why I was watching the board. What are you doing to the damn kick sound? Leave the thing alone.
You're burning
it's fine.
through my money.
Leave that kick sound alone. It's fine. Reggie Calloway, I'll tell you a funny thing. It's another one of my mentors. I'm so very lucky because I've had great mentors. And that's where you sort of started this conversation. Reggie said, I was mixing the second Calloway record, and Reggie's one of the great producers of all time. And he said, we were mixing, and the song was done. It was a Skip Saylor studio, and he came in and he said, we eventually got to the place where he loved it, and he said, print it. And he left. And he went in the other room and he had lunch. Okay? Or something. Coffee, who knows. An hour and a half later or so, he comes back in, and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, there were these little sounds I wanted to, do this to and that to. And he said, he looks at me and he's like, I bet you thought that was time well spent, didn't you? And in my mind, without opening my mouth, I'm like, yeah, I thought it was time well spent, And he just shook his head and walked out of the room, and I realized, okay. He turns around at the door and he said, I told you the mix was awesome. There is no such word as awesomer. And I said, I got it. Somebody needed to tell me that. You have to finalize it. When you get it, you have to know you get it. You have to know it. You can't work a song for 2 years.
This is great feedback for our viewers because, again, they are lone rangers in their own room with nobody to say what Reggie said to you. So for them, and we've had this discussion before, either on stage at the Road Rally or here in my office about, well, how do you know if you don't have some other human being? Well, there's a good use for AI that can tell you, you've got, it's good enough, walk out of the room.
No, all you need is that red button.
Right.
Sounds good to me. Right. Sounds good to me. Print it.
I really enjoy these conversations because I think we're able to turn people that just by the nature of the way things are done now are flying solo in a room, and they don't have Kirk Franklin or Reggie Calloway or Jay King to stop them, educate them, inspire them, mentor them, all that stuff.
And it's not just those guys, by the way. So one of my other assistants, Steve Durkee, who does like all these Marvel movies now, he's like the guy, right? If you see Guardians of the Galaxy and Iron Man, there's his name, like in credit number 3.
Wow,
really
it does it in what regard?
So when he was my assistant, I would turn to him because I thought he had great ears, and many times I'd say, "What do you think?" It wasn't how it was like. It was the look in his face when he answered me, not necessarily the words he said. And we did Wild Wild West or one of those songs, Men in Black. And he looked at me like, I don't even remember what he said, but his eyes said, "Rob, you're so stupid, just print the thing." It ended up being a number 1 hit, But I could tell by his eyes, Sometimes that's the revealing thing, like he would tell me, it sounds good, Rob. Really, it does. Like, don't second guess, And sometimes you need that guy because you get in that frame of mind. I don't really anymore, but there's always those moments of doubt.
Yeah,
there are. And somebody to tell you, that lyric could be a little bit better. And Nate and Kaylee and I work great that way because they'll send me something and I'll tell you I don't comment much, but because their lyrics are usually so strong. But if I ever make a comment, they inevitably say, "We were wondering if that one was borderline." It's like they had a sense and they weren't sure. And then if I said, "Well, I'm not sure about this either," and then they'd change it and then they'd nail it. maybe it's just that one little thing to make you revisit something.
Confirming their own doubts.
And that's important too, because that pushes you again. It's all about getting to that point of excellence. And if you got to have people you trust and that have to feel free enough to give you this unvarnished truth,
It's
and if they're professional, they will.
Right.
So we come back to that word again.
Over and over again.
Over and over.
The taxi screeners actually perform that role to some degree with our members, because I hear that exact thing sometimes from members where they say, I used to get really pissed off at your screeners. I felt like they wanted to find a reason to not forward me. And then they mature a little bit as a member, as an artist, a producer, whatever. And eventually they find that the taxi screeners confirm that little voice in your head going, I don't know, it feels like it should be just a little faster. But you're so deep into it now, and it's like, oh, what a pain in the ass to go back and fix it. But then somebody else with real ears says to you, I love everything about this. It feels just a little laggy. Like, try 3 more BPMs.
Yeah, and some people are looking just for validation. They don't want the criticism. They want to feel like they've done something great. But my mom did that. Actually, my mom didn't always do that. There were times she's like, honey, will you shut up? I mean, that one's no bueno, you know what I mean? She definitely would tell me. But, like I don't have, if you play me a song, I don't have to like it. I don't.
Yeah.
I can be straight with you and tell you this is what I think. Take it or leave it, but you're going to get a high measure of truth, because I don't think it's that helpful to...
And then I'm going to convince you to like it.
No,
I'm joking, but that's what people do.
But doesn't mean I'm always right either. I mean, there's a lot of that, and I'll tell you, I don't mean to sound cold about it, but it's so important to have somebody who you can rely on, give you some honest feedback that doesn't feel like the job is on the line or that your friendship's on the line if you don't love everything they do. I mean, as long as you're constructive and you're trying to be helpful, and if the goal is to get a hit or the goal is to really get the most out of the music, then I think that's the way to go. You got to be straight with people in as nice a way as you can, and it's about doing good work, writing a great song. I mean, I don't know if I told you, but I went to see Jimmy Webb at the Canyon Club.
I didn't know he played the Candy Club. I've seen him do his show before where he talks about why or how he wrote the songs.
And to listen to this guy, I met him afterwards. I was like, I mean, these are formative songs.
Yeah.
And I was like teary-eyed.
He's one of the greatest writers
of
ever.
all time. Yeah. And, when you hear these guys talk, they struggle too. We all do. They struggle with the lyric. His wife didn't like one of the songs. Ended up being the biggest hit for, Art Garfunkel back in the 60s, All I Know, I think, is the song. And it's one of the most beautiful songs. But, I mean, there are moments of doubt. We all have them.
Let's get into some technical stuff or actual gear. I've never asked you this before.
Mm-hmm.
Neve or SSL?
I'm usually an SSL guy for the mixes, but a Neve guy for the tracking.
You kill that, it's buzzing your phone.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it is.
Oh.
Thanks. How hard is it? Well, obviously it's not hard. That's a dumb question on my part. But you do so much work sitting at, and people must imagine, oh, Rob Chiarelli, a top echelon mixer, his home studio must have, just all this great gear and stuff in it. It's people would be shocked if they walked in there. It's basically, Pro Tools in a rack, and would use a Mac Mini that's completely hot rodded as your computer, and you have a Fairchild, if I remember correctly.
No, it's a Universal Audio 175A from 1956 or something.
Right, and very little other outboard in the room, and you're like a wizard with a trackball. Rob's got one of those big, like 1998 big ass trackball.
No, it's not got the little one. What are you talking about?
I remember your trackball being. I put my hand on it. Wow,
come by the house again. Come on. It's a little one.
Okay, so that's your methodology. That's how you work, is with the trackball and pointing and clicking.
Yeah,
and,
I don't like stuff like that, like the little
yeah.
like those digital consoles. I like the SSL, so I do those. I do SSL mixes as much as projects and budgets allow. But otherwise I like the trackball.
I want to get myself all the SSL stuff. The controller, the stuff that can be strapped together in a 3-foot area. That I missed working on the SSL. The flow was just so intuitive. It's like the first time you turn on a Macintosh computer and you figure it out in an hour, at least to get it up and running. I always felt that.
I'm definitely an SSL guy. I love that stuff.
Let's talk reverb.
Okay.
People, I think I was working with a band called Martin's Dam.
I remember them.
They were signed to A&M as the group Bricklin. They got dropped from the label. They formed a little different band that was less 80s sounding, less funny looking hair on them.
No spandex.
Yeah, no spandex. It was probably around 1993, 94 that I met them. And sometime in 95 or 96, they said, hey, would you come out for a weekend? They lived in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. Their parents had a house with a pretty big living room with like a wood floor, a river rock fireplace, big span of glass looking out at the forest on one side and curtains on the other side. It was a well-balanced room. So we threw a couple of rugs down on the floor, set the drums up in the room, set the amps up in the room, and I had a Mackie 8-bus console on a snake about 100 feet away in their parents' garage in the wintertime.
I like those Mackies. Those are pretty good.
Sounded great.
For those days, and probably still sound great.
And I think I had 2 Alesis compressors, the kind with the slider on the front. It's like more or less.
Oh, that's the DBX 1.
No, these were not the DBX 160X or 165. I know the one you're thinking of, but no, these were made by Alesis, and they were about this big.
Oh.
They were tiny little things, and all they had was like more or less on and off. And I used those, and I think I had a couple of Sennheiser 421s, a couple of 57s. I think
you made the whole album.
We did 4 or 5 songs, and if I played you this stuff, I listened to it and go, wow, that was a time when I was rather full of myself, because I went, oh, I don't need to work in an SSL or a Neve room that was designed by John Stork with 100 different awesome mics and a wall full of great outboard. It's the ear, not the gear. So all that to say, as much as I was patting myself on the back, and every time I listened to it, I re-pat myself on the back, but it's people, I'm telling you, that was one of my prouder moments. I worked with nothing and made it sound great because I was taught by the best. I had great mentors, and I knew how things should sound and was able to get it with minimal equipment. So let's take this back to reverb, because they walked in the room for the first playback, and they had a scratch vocal they were cutting with the track, and I had that thing. Probably
always record that first scratch vocal.
Absolutely.
Always record that.
It'll be the best performance ever. May have things you have to fix.
Most of it will, yes.
But I had so much reverb, and I think I was using like the $200 Alesis reverb thing, probably again more or less. But
are they sponsoring this?
No, they're not. And I remember the guys walked in the room, and none of them wanted to tell me. They were all looking at each other. First thing they said was, wow, it sounds great. Can't believe we just did that in a living room. And there was this little pause.
Oh, boy.
And I looked at them, I went, what? But there's that human feedback. They said, dude, your reverb sounds like 10 years ago.
Oh.
And they were right, because the last time I had done a serious project might have been 10 years before that. And I carried that sound forward. And they said, just get rid of it. Any reverb you've got on anything, just turn it off for right now, play it back, and it instantly sounded better. So I think that people fall in love with reverb because it does make everything sound prettier in solo. You can take a poor sounding vocal, it sounds better with reverb. A snare sound will sound better with reverb. But in the context of modernity, trying to, right now, reverb is not...
Modernity, like being modern?
Yeah.
Did you make that word up?
No, it's a real word.
I like it. Okay.
So it's like awesomer.
Awesomer and modernity.
Yeah. Look, that'd be a great name.
Merriam-Webster.
Yeah, great name for a
ahead.
production company. Awesomer modernity. Anyway, people will get a new reverb plug-in and they fall in love with it because they're just having a blast. The thing sounds amazing. And they don't realize that that kind of reverb was 10 years ago. So they put it on their project. And it could be something as simple as you've got 3 seconds of decay and too much of it. And it just sounds like a record from 1979. Okay. So how do you pay attention to other engineers, mixers, records you
That's
like?
why I pay attention.
No, I'm saying, do you notice things like
What?
Do you notice things like reverb?
Yeah.
And where would you say we're at with reverb right now?
You know, it's funny. It's gone through a big change recently, I think. I mean, there was a period of, dark reverbs tucked away in the back, and then it became like reverbs where it was long pre-delay. And there was ducking reverbs that came in for a bit, and then it became long, bright reverbs like Crystalline makes one, which is really nice.
Oh, I've got that.
And that's, those reverbs tucked in the background sound really cool. And then there's, side chained verbs, and they all have their little place. And for a while, it was just the little early reflections. Everything was super dry. And now what I think is happening is there's filtered verbs. There's all kinds of cool little things that people are doing, and that's one way. Maybe you just take whatever reverb you've always been using and try to do something different with it. Filter it, maybe, do something interesting. I don't mean, pan it around. Maybe that would be cool too. But, try to do something. A reverb is a reverb, but you can add pre-delay, or you can make it really dark and that takes up space, but you don't really hear it. Or you can make it really bright, and it can be sailing at a 4.5 second decay time in the background, which is kind of cool too, depending on the song. It has to serve the song, and it has to be, and to do something cool with it.
Oh, that's vague.
Well, I just gave you 10 ideas. I said pre-delay. I said, early reflections.
Did you give me an answer on where things are at right now?
People are doing all that right now.
Okay.
So
there's not a trend other than experimentation.
I think all those things are going on right now. People are big, and ducking verbs are big. I think all of that is happening right now. And I think if you listen to the records, that it's all really interesting.
I've heard records done by people that you and I would say are top echelon mixers. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll crank them up in the car because I will notice the reverb. And one thing, a mistake that I hear, in my opinion, it's a mistake, is people leave too much bottom end in reverb, which can totally destroy every other aspect of a mix. It can muddy up the bass, can muddy up the drums, it just makes it harder to hear all the instruments because you've got this like somewhere between 250 and 500 hertz, this crap just swimming around in there, and there's no purpose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a couple of clients, pretty well-known people who make me filter that out because that's what they really like. And then there's other times when I gotta tell you, I've done a lot of records where I'll filter everything above 1K, and it's all that low-endy, weirdy reverb is pretty awesome, It
Don't
depends
you find
on the song.
if you've gotten, and we should talk about balance because that's the most important thing about everything with mixing, in my personal opinion, is people spend way too much time worrying about, like a ducking reverb or some other little nit, and they forget about balance. But let's go back to, so you've got all your balances. And you like the way the vocal sounds. You like where the vocal sits in the mix. The drums sound cool and modern. Mm-hmm. Everybody's where they need to be. Mm-hmm. And then your client says, can you add reverb to that keyboard pad? And you do. And all of a sudden, everything else in your balance, you look up and go, what happened to my mix? And it's just that guilty little reverb that did it. My experience. Do you ever encounter that?
No, I mean, not really, because I wouldn't put that much reverb.
Well,
I'll tuck it in.
I would. I'm thinking a particular record, the Melanie record I did, Ballroom Streets, where we did it live in the studio. Her husband, God rest his soul, Peter Shakaric, always said to me, more reverb on Mel's voice. And I had an EMT 250, the first digital reverb that EMT made, which is kind of a classic. And I had 2 live chambers. And both of those things had a fair amount of low mids in the verb. And so he would say, add more reverb, and I'd wait for him to walk out of the room, and then I would filter it. I would put the high pass on it just to get that rumbly bottom end out of there, and my mix would come back. That was probably the first time in my professional career where I noticed that reverb cannot be, or is not your friend unless you're smart enough to really listen to what it's doing to everything else.
Well, let me to add something, because if you listen to California Dreamin', I guess I understand that's like 1966.
Yeah.
If you listen to the Beach Boys and that stuff, and if you listen to certain Sinatra records and things, you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, I will tell you, there's a record called Pennies from Heaven, famous Sinatra song, with it's on an album called Sinatra and Basie, A Musical First.
Okay.
And that record, if my life depended on it, I couldn't come close. It sounds so great.
Capitol Studio A?
Maybe.
Probably.
But it is bananas how great that record sounds. It's got all the dynamics you could ever want. It's beautiful. And there are so many records like that, and some Bob Marley records where you think, boy, I love that song. And I listened to the vinyl of some of those Bob Marley songs recently, and I'm like, wow, his voice is way too low. But it never bothered me, because it vibed out. It sounded so great. Like, the vibe is so good, and then you hear the backgrounds, and you hear little, these little things. And, man, those imperfections never bothered me, because it had the vibe. It had the vibe.
The vibe it had. I worked with them for 3 days at Criteria.
Oh, yeah.
I was the assistant on the session, and a guy named Alex Sadkin, one of our staff engineers, they'd fallen in love with him because he was just like the biggest white guy fan of reggae. Nobody in America loved reggae more than Alex Sadkin, and they felt that with him, and they started working with him. And he quickly discovered clean is not an option with making Bob Marley records. It's they had a vibe and the sound. If you didn't capture what was out in the room, it didn't work. But it was the only time in my life I ever had a contact high, because every member of the band came in with an I kid you not, every freaking member of the band.
People know what a contact high is?
Yes, where you don't actually do what Bill Clinton did. You inhale the smoke in the room. For those of you who aren't old enough to know what a contact high is, it means you're not actually smoking weed, but everybody else in the room was. These guys would each bring an Adidas gym bag with about a pound or two of weed in there, and they would.
Are you supposed to be talking about this?
Yeah, that's fine. It's a family show.
Oh Lord.
Anyway, I'm not kidding you, but I tell you, there were times when there'd be 4 guys in the control room, each smoking a spliff, and within 10 minutes, you were stoned and incapable.
Flying, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why the vocal was so low.
Right. He couldn't wake himself up to sing it. Oh, man, we only have 8 minutes left. Is that possible? I still have pages left to go. Are you okay if we go 15 minutes long? Just because it feels like it's...
Bring it, baby. Bring it.
All right. Compression.
I think I'm going to have a taxi... the road rally, you just made me think of doing a mix session, and we're going to let everybody have a comment in the room. Everybody. And I know just how I'm going to do it. So next year,
all right,
we're going to have to do the prequel on one of the Monday, what do you call these things?
Taxi TV.
Taxi TVs. We'll do it right before the rally. We'll let people know how we're going to do it so they can all come and participate. I think I have a good idea. You just inspired it.
We can call it Fix the Mix.
Fix the Mix. Or ruin it. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, too much input is too much input. I remember the old Saturday Night Live, More Cowbell.
More Cowbell.
And they would go, more input. Those were the days.
Not me. Never saw any of that.
I know you didn't, but I'm older than you are. Compression. It's a misunderstood thing by people who are just learning how to engineer and mix their own stuff at home. And they keep hearing, sidechain your compressor, do this with your compressor, all these tricks that they read about on forums or Facebook pages or YouTube videos. But that's not going to sell one more record. It's not going to, cause people to stream it one more time. And I think they spend too much time worrying about it. My personal approach most of the time, like 80 or 90%, was use it to keep things from being too peaky or standing out or whatever. It's a leveling device, plain and simple. People try and use it as a creative tool when they're not ready yet. You've got to be a master. And I guess maybe I'm answering my own question. The way to become a master of using compression is by making all those mistakes that you make when you don't really understand how to use it and all the things it can do. Do you have a Rob Chiarelli's, if you were teaching a class on compression, what might be the first thing you would teach?
Do the levels before you do the compression.
Which levels? Mix levels or record levels?
Yeah, a lot of people I think use a compressor because they don't want to take the time to ride the vocal beforehand. As an example, using the compressor because the vocal levels were out of whack, that is a sound, and it's a modern sound, and it's cool, and it's a place for it. But step one, get the vocal sounding as close as you can, without it. But there are a lot of things assumed. Are we recording the vocal correctly? Is there a good mic? Is it a good singer? Is the mic distance correct? Is there a compressor? Is it a crap compressor? Was it overloaded to tape? There's a lot of things there. So compression can save your life. It can also, hurt if it's not, used musically.
Yeah.
And nowadays there's a lot of compression on everything.
Everything. It kind of breaks my heart. I don't like when people say, I don't like today's music, but I will say that I don't like the amount of compression I hear on virtually everything that hits the radio. It's like, you guys, do you know what dynamic range is? Do you know
gone. There's not much these days.
No, nuance is gone. Go back and listen to those Sinatra records. There's nuance there because they didn't have a wall full of compressors to use.
But I'm cool with it.
Yeah?
I am. I think it sounds cool.
So what would you teach somebody who's trying to learn how to be a better mixer today in modern times? Do you have, what would you
start with low ratios and release times at 100 milliseconds and above. Start right there. Start with 2 to 1.
Yeah.
And release times at 100 milliseconds.
Okay.
And that just cut half of your problem out. Now you need to worry about threshold and attack time.
Right.
Got you halfway there.
And attack time is something that people often think, okay, I'm doing a tambourine or a kick drum or a snare, something very percussive with, just tons of velocity in the signal, blah, blah, blah. And they will make the attack time really short because they want to capture that thing. What they don't realize is they've just squashed it so immediately and so drastically that it goes to hell and sounds like crap right away. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you make the attack time longer than your early instinct might be, it allows you to hear the fullness of the sound before the compressor.
The transients, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you still have to use your ears.
Yes, you do.
There's no technical answer to that. You still have to use your ears, and sometimes you got to learn what to listen for. And I will say, if you're getting into this new, find the simplest compressor. If you're a Pro Tools person, use the compressor that came with the unit. Mm-hmm. Don't use these compressors that color the sound, and learn that compressor as well as anyone on the face of the earth. Then move to the next one. Learn one. You
and I have both talked, and we both like. I was literally ridiculed by every one of my peers back in the day because I loved LA3s.
I love LA3s. They're my favorite analog compressor.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I think I have 3 of them.
Fact. There's your answer. If you don't know what to do for compression, put an LA3 on everything. You take it from there.
It is amazing how it sounds good.
Works.
Sounds great on acoustic guitars. Sounds great on a lead guitar. Sounds great on a vocal.
Yeah, those are great. They work. There, just saved you a year.
Yeah, vocal chain. People obsess about reading about vocal chains. You actually have a plugin that you sell, a Final Mix plugin that's a vocal chain plugin. Is it smarter for people who are early in their learning trajectory, becoming a good, solid, experienced mixer, to use a vocal chain plugin that saves them from themselves?
Well, I mean, the different people have different needs. So if you want to be a mix engineer, then you're going to have to learn the details of the trade. It's right, the craft. If you're a songwriter and all you're trying to do is get your demo out, then, I mean, you know, a lot of songwriters, they want to learn. You probably have to learn auto-tune or Melodyne, but, I mean, do you really need to spend all your time if you're really a songwriter? Do you really want to spend time talking about attack and release times? No, you kind of want to get the thing in there and have the song come to life and realize what the song is. So that's a different, you know, that's a different thing. So if I'm trying to write a song, I'm trying to write it and I'm trying to get it. You know, I'm not going to stop and do attack times and release times. I'm going to do something that's going to get me to the next thing that's in my brain so I can get it on tape, right? And no one's going to want to stop and while I adjust the threshold and the attack and the release and then A-B it and solo it and compare it to the bass.
I think people do, and it's a bad rabbit hole to go down to because
could be
it gets you off course, which is getting a vocal that helps sell the song.
Yeah, if I'm writing, I'll do quick stuff. Quick. If I'm mixing, well, it's very deliberate. It's a different thing. I still do it pretty quick, but it's a different approach. Songwriter wants to write the song.
Yeah.
A mixer wants to mix the song. A producer's looking for clever ways to, you know, bring the song to life, right?
In your professional world, that's true. In the world of many of the people who'll be watching us today, they're lone rangers sitting at home, and they are the songwriter, but they've been forced, kind of in a good way, I guess, to become an engineer, and forced in a good way, I guess, to become a mix engineer. They've had to learn. The business, the craft of making records, and the craft of writing songs are all things that anybody who wants to make it in the business today has to learn. So I agree that anything you have to spend more than 5 or 10 minutes on is taking you out of that groove, and the songwriting groove is the most important thing. Because if you have
I can't think of anything other than maybe a vocal that I'm spending 5 or 10 minutes on, just like in pausing.
Yeah.
I don't know. 10 minutes on a kick drum would be weird to me, I think.
God, you would have died laughing at some of my earlier work. There were times where I'd spend an hour on a kick drum.
Well, I did too, but I mean, you know, over time, again, these things don't happen like that quickly. You know, you have to learn, and I think I'm still learning every day that I'm mixing. And I think if I didn't keep learning, I mean, I think that, I don't know, it might lose its luster, so to speak. I love a challenge. I love hearing something. Well, how am I gonna? That doesn't feel quite right. How am I gonna get that, you know, in harmony with the rest of the record? And I spend a little time on stuff, and if it's backgrounds or choirs, I might ride that. That takes time, writing and making sure that, you know, you bring out the little trinkets, you know. But yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. You have to learn these things. It's like, it's hard. I think people have it hard these days because they have to learn a computer program. There's a million plugins out there, and most of them are crap. And many of them are really good, and some of them are tools that can help, and others are like, man, it makes things more difficult. And then there's the routing of everything, aux channels, and you got 100 tracks to work with. I mean, you got 512 tracks in many of these DAWs, and some are 1,000 tracks. So for us, when we came into the business, there were 24 tracks. One had SEMPTY, track 24, and track 23, you wouldn't usually use it.
Because it was next to the code and you didn't want to bleed?
Yeah. in the 16 tracks, and the Beatles did their stuff on 4 tracks, maybe 8 tracks later on, but I mean, they had to make decisions. And
Which is where you started out an hour and a half ago.
Making a decision is an important what's the word I'm looking for? Skill. It's an important skill. Being able to make a decision in the moment and deciding whether you love it or not, you know. And sometimes you listen to it 100 times and you're like, shit, I can't tell the difference, you know.
And it's probably not a life-changing thing that you're trying to make that decision on. You know, making the snare fatter or skinnier, more or less reverb, it's not going to get you a placement in a TV show any faster. You know, if you're working on a Kirk Franklin record and you've got a gospel choir, you know, you need to know what you're doing and you need to make that sound amazing so that he'll love it, you'll love it, and the choir gets its due. But most applications, I think that people don't realize that. I used to ask myself that question. My assistants would all tell you. I'd turn around, look at them, and say, "Is it going to sell one more record? If what we're going to spend this
is
hour,
it going to change the lyric?"
Yeah, and it's not.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. You know, that's the decision you do have to make. In many cases, the answer is, I mean, what's a half a dB at 75 hertz going to do on a snare drum, for example? Is that going to make a difference? Do I like the half a dB? Do I not? Do you play it for 10 people? Do you? I mean, come on.
Right.
I mean,
That's
put it on there and live with it. And if that's the thing that's going to kill you, move on. Okay, now let's go to the kick drum. Or now let's go to the lead vocal. Is the vocal placed correctly? Does it feel good? And when you play that tape, does it set? Or when you hit the play bar, does it kill you? Do you love it?
You start out mixing with a vocal. That blew me away.
Sometimes I do. I
always started with drums, but when you said that, I went, whoa. And it makes perfect sense. I actually look forward to the day where I get to go back into a real room and do real mixes again. I want to try that because serve the song. There's nothing more important to the heart of a song than the vocalist and the lyric that the vocalist is singing.
Yeah, not necessarily in every genre, and I don't do it every day, but people are surprised sometimes if I go. Sometimes I'll listen to the song and I get to know it. I'll play it down and I'll start soloing and I'll listen to see what I got. Boom, 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 boom. Drums sound fine. I'm like, oh, the drums, they should be easy. That should be quick. Oh, wait a minute, this vocal is going to need some attention. So I say, okay, I get what the song's trying to do, but there is the money, and I got to really spend time on that. Or I might say the vocal, I mean, that's a beautiful vocal and it's really well balanced, and then I'll hear the backgrounds and I'll say, the breaths, those are really important. Or let me clean up the mouth noise, or there's some nice little pickup notes that I really want to bring out, and that where I think I can really make a big impact. Whereas maybe the hi-hat, okay, it's all right if it's a dB. If it's not perfect, maybe that's not where I'm going to spend an hour, But it all depends on time. Time management is a big deal. It's a big deal. But the hi-hat versus the lead vocal, I mean, come on, man. What are we doing?
A lot of people who haven't figured out where, what's more important might spend an equal amount of time on both early in their career. So I'm glad you brought that up so they can sort of train themselves to not be overly attentive to things that aren't going to amount to a hill of beans, and the vocal does.
On the other hand, if I got drums, and I still will do this. I'll get those drums blasted, and I'll be just vibing out, and there's nothing but drums. Then I'll put the bass in. Oh my God, I'm like, oh, I love this. And I start getting into it, and I'm like, wow, okay, I'm in a flow, and then bam, lead vocal or whatever's the next thing. And, building a mix is not always the same way twice, I guess.
It's funny, at the top of my last page of notes here, drums. What percentage of drums that you work with are programmed versus live?
75% programmed, but because of my genre, I'd say there's a lot of live drums. So a lot of times it's both. 50-50 both.
Do you have any tips for people that, again, are in homebound studios, flying solo? They're using, what is it called? Something drummer.
Superior drummer.
Superior drummer, yeah. Or maybe even the drummer that comes in Logic, which is far better than I think it gets credit for sometimes. Do you have any tips on things that can be done by somebody who's not all that professional or experienced yet, that can make programmed drums sound more human?
No.
Okay, fair enough.
Not really. Not in this time.
My experience, going back to my day, the mid 70s to the mid 80s, many of the drums were like, you wanted it boom, the kick drum to hit you in the chest, and the snares, goosh.
But all these are great programs, these drum programs.
Oh, they are. They sound great. What I'm saying, though, is now I hear so many pop records where the drums are like, tick, they just sound different. They sound appropriate and right and contemporary for the style that's happening today. I would have to go relearn that. If I started making records again, I would have to relearn my approach to drums, because I would be putting 1978 drum sounds on 2025 records.
Yeah, but you know what's funny? Is that would be probably really cool. Like
Really?
a 70s
I wouldn't
drum
get laughed
sound?
out of the control room?
I don't think so. I think that if you, in the right sense, depends on what you're going for. But I think like that, we talked about trying something new.
Yeah.
Yeah, put some 70s drum sounds and use those mics that were only available during that period of time, using only the modules, and really capture that time, that window, that snapshot of that period of time, and then layer some modern stuff over it. I mean, look, that would be. I think that would be super cool. I do. Someone out there is going to do it, and it's going to be cool. It's already being done by some people, but
Do you mix differently for radio than you might mix for a streaming platform like Spotify?
No.
Are there any kind of large overarching statements about mixing? So much of the music is listened to today on earbuds out of somebody's phone. Do you mix differently knowing that today than you mixed 15 years ago, when people would listen? A car radio might have been the most common way that people heard music.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great question for me, because when I started mixing in '89, I got NS10s. I put them everywhere, in my house, my car, in the back of the seat. People would have to move it out of the back seat so they could sit down. I just wanted to have NS10s, so I learned them. And then, music has changed, and we sharpen our skills, and I have a pretty good sense. That's what I use 90% of the time. Do I check it on other formats? I do most of the time, but I trust those more than anything, because I know them. And it doesn't matter that I say NS10s. You might like, I don't know, any other speaker, JBLs, for example. And if you know them, then your mixes should be very close.
Yeah.
I mean, they should be. I mean, we have to know what earbuds sound like. We have to know, and there's Atmos mixing now. That's a bit of a consideration. You have headphones, different types of headphones, and all kinds of. You can't anticipate every pair of speakers that anyone's going to ever listen on.
Right.
You just have to have a sense for it, and that comes over time. I used to mix records that the snare drum was way too loud, because back then the mastering guys would limit it to go to get to vinyl, and that part would get scooped up and it would sit a little better in the. I don't have to do that now. Now I know the mastering engineers, and I can tell them, what do I think? This is, Herb Powers is another guy I love, and Gavin Lurson, another guy. I just love their work, but I can call them up and say, hey, I think this, listen to this frequency. Maybe the snare's a little hot, see what you think, and if they think that I need to make an adjustment, they'll ring me up or they'll send me a note. Maybe we can do 2 versions and give me a little bit more bass on this one, and we'll listen, and we do it, and there you go.
You just gave me the final thing we're going to talk about, notes, which is feedback. And you and I have been out to dinner, and you've stood up and said, I'm sorry, I've got to go. Kirk Franklin or whoever the artist you were working with in that day, and you were like...
You keep mentioning him. He's like the easiest guy.
Well, okay. I'm just trying to think of... I think it actually might have been Kirk that night, but
okay.
You excuse yourself. I think you and I and our wives were out to dinner, and
it's happened many times.
Yeah,
somebody needs something, I got to take care of it.
Right. So you live in this world of texted feedback. Notes come in the form of a text or an email, and you said it's not unusual to just get tons of notes, whereas back in the day you could be sitting next to the producer or have the artist in the room and the feedback was very immediate. My
Immediate.
my point in asking this is now,
And decisions had to be made because that clock was ticking
Right.
and studio dollars were crunching. And
Yeah.
that's still the case in many sessions, but go on.
okay, so now you're getting notes, whoever the artist is, doesn't have to be Kirk, but
Let's say Elvis.
okay.
Can we use Elvis?
Yeah, well, he's
Let's
dead.
use Elvis.
But we're out to dinner.
We're hanging out. Elvis texts
2
me.
hours before we went to dinner, you sent the mix. Your artist was out to dinner when he or she got the mix. When they got home, they listened to it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times.
Yep.
Made you a long list of notes. Things, what do you think about the bass? Is it too heavy? Is the snare too loud? Is the vocal present enough? Blah, 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 whatever the notes are. And now you've got to go leave dinner, go back to your control room in your garage, and
Only for certain people, yes.
okay, and make those fixes. And now they've gone to bed, and you send them the updated version, and now they get back to you on Sunday morning.
Yep, they're on a plane or they're on the road and then they're in the hotel.
Yeah,
Sure.
And so how can you move forward at any? How do you progress
Well, there's usually 5-10 mixes going on at one time.
with
at any
other
given
clients?
time. Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
How do
usually
you
that's
keep
the
your
case.
head wrapped around that much disparity?
It's not that hard. I mean, you get used to it.
Automation's got to be a big help for that because
It is, that's another thing. So, but mostly it's very rare if I get a long list. It's usually in an email. I really try to ask everybody to give it to me in an email because I can track the history, and if we ever have to revert, I understand what's going on. But there's usually 3 or 4 comments maybe. Sometimes there's none. Sometimes there's maybe 8 to 10. But it's usually not more than that. And it might be, can you turn up the backgrounds in the bridge? There's one comment. The lead vocal, can you give me a hair, make it a little more present? Or give me a little more side stick or something. There's a few of those little things. And then I just do it. I make little comments in red that says I turned up the side stick 0.5 dB. I brightened the vocal at 3K, let's say, or whatever it may be, 0.5 dB, and shoot it back, and they say, great, or no, let's split the difference. And I see where the mix is at. I make the comments. I send it off. It's easy. When you think about it, it's seamless that way. There's also, I can broadcast my mix with certain clients. Almost anyone who wants, I'll broadcast the mix. They can listen to it in real time out of their own computer.
Wow.
And they can tell me what they think. So if we have something that's really complicated, I can make the change. They can listen to it in real time, and they say, that's it. Or no, you're in the wrong spot, Rob. Or whatever the case may be, and we'll make the adjustment. Bingo, we're done. Not so bad.
You are living in a different world, my friend, and I'm envious. Man.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
It's exciting. Well, thank you. This was
All right.
one of our better ones, in my humble opinion.
That's because it's shop talk, baby.
That's right.
Shop talk.
We do love the shop talk. All right. Well, I will see you guys next week again for another episode of Taxi TV. Thank you so much for doing this on a Sunday. And
I'm glad to be here. Always fun.
right before we did this, I was at a petting zoo with my daughter and son-in-law and grandkids, and I was telling Rob when I picked them up, I changed my clothes because I had a goat trying to hump me. I had goat.
Oh, you have to end this thing on the goat?
Well, but I smelled like a goat. I got in the car with Rob on the way here, and I could still smell barn or farm animals on my shoes. But just now, as we're sitting here, all of a sudden I got a whiff of goat.
That was me.
And that's how we're going to end this episode.
Just a little gas.
Bad joke. See you guys next week. Bye-bye. Greatest of all time.
Hey.